Number 2, let go of comparisons. Okay, yes, let's talk about comparisons. Anyone heard comparisons is the thief of all joy? So you've all probably heard many times, okay, don't compare yourself to others, and social media can be really toxic. It can lead to body dysmorphia and be really, feeling really inadequate. I won't necessarily repeat the same things, but you've also heard of the saying, the grass is always greener on the other side, right? That's a very common saying. Comparisons is actually an internal competition. So when you find yourself comparing yourself to someone else or something else, it's a competition. But it's not like you're in Beijing and you're, doing speed skating or something like that. It's all in your head, which is understandable. We all do it. I do it too. Think about it this way, but there are some consequences to comparing ourselves all the time. If we think of it as a competition is something like a threat, right? It's like you're speed skating, and then you notice someone else is a little bit ahead of you, so it activates your brain to just work extra harder to surpass them. So it activates the fight, flight, freeze response when we start engaging in that competition. But because it's in our head, and because we're exposed to so many unrealistic ideals or not fully transparent differences in other people, often what happens with comparisons is we never feel like we're good enough. Now, let me put it into context for fight, flight, freeze. So when you're comparing yourself to someone or something that you think is better than you can hurt yourself feeling like, I need to fight myself to be better. And that can lead to pain, and that can lead to mental health trauma as well. Flight, if you're engaging in the flight response, maybe because in your head you are not good enough in terms of these comparisons, you might be running away from yourself, and that can lead to shame, feeling like I am not good enough. I know some clients that have a hard time looking at themselves in the mirror because again, there's that feeling of never being good enough, that internal competition. And then freeze is sometimes that might lead to losing all hope. Like there is no hope for me to feel better because there's that internalized comparison, which is that internalized competition. Okay, so what can we do about comparisons? But here's something else. 2 truths for the lie. See what I did there? Okay. So the idea here is to acknowledge that it's not often a fair comparison. Okay? It really is apples and oranges for most things that we engage in that internal comparison with. The truth is that when we're thinking about other people, the reality is that we are not the same. So many times I'll speak to clients that will bring up an example of someone in their life that seems to be doing better than them for whatever reason, in whatever metric, right? They maybe got into med school and then the client didn't, or they got engaged and they're single, or they bought a fancy house or fancy car, whatever it might be. Lots of comparisons. Or it seems like their mental health is better than mine, or it seems like they're just doing better in life, seems like they're happier. What's wrong with me? The reality is that we are not all the same. We are not necessarily dealt all the same deck of cards. There is something called privilege. And at the same time, what is good for someone isn't necessarily good for someone else. What is beautiful in someone may not necessarily be the same beauty in someone else. Someone else's beauty doesn't necessarily take away from my beauty if my beauty is different, but we may not necessarily recognize that. So the reality is that we are not all the same, and that's a beautiful thing. Imagine if we were all homogenous and we all looked exactly the same. How boring would that be? And remember that saying, the grass is always greener on the other side? Well, the way I understand it is that that's actually an optical illusion. So think about grass, right? Grass are blades that stick up, right? Now, in between grass blades, there's, the soil, right? It's kind of brown, maybe even be a little yellow, but that doesn't stick up. Now, if you are looking at the grass on the ground, are you likely to see the blades only, or are you also likely to see the soil and the dead grass on the ground? The latter, right? But if you're looking at the grass from afar, how easy is it to see the soil, see the dead grass, the thatch on the bottom? It's hard to see because you're looking at it from a different angle, right? So even if you have two lawns that are identical, just by virtue of your perspective, when you look at the grass, you notice the flaws on the lawn you're standing on, but you can't notice it from the perspective looking at your neighbor's grass. The idea is that when you're sitting in your own skin, you see almost everything about yourself. So it's really easy to see your own flaws. But when you're looking at someone else across the street, the neighbors, especially on social media, which is a highlight reel of a person's life, you don't really get to see the ugly sides. You don't get to look at the dirt and soil. Keep in mind that even when you are comparing yourself to others, that you don't have a full picture of their lives. So it's understandable if it feels like you are less than. It's all an optical illusion. So instead, what can we do? We can focus on watering ourselves, right? The grass is greener where you water it. That's the follow-up kind of expression.